It's a quote from Elie Wiesel. Do you all know who he is? Very okay. Wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. Whoa. Whoa.
Wow.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's worth turning into a page, I think.
Yeah.
Quote, the center of the universe. Talk about prioritization. It's like,
and it's let's see. At that moment is highlighted, in like at that moment. Do not wait. Act. I thought it was fabulous.
yeah.
It's posted in our feed.
No, I haven't done that yet. I will.
I said, could you?
Oh, yes. When I get my phone back on, I'll take a picture of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was really touched by that, taken by that. Okay.
Thanks for sharing. I love it. So,
hi, Zach.
We're going to be talking about, hey, Zach. Intersectionality. It's a topic that we've broached before. So what do y'all remember about intersectionality in general, what that term refers to?
I don't.
Yeah, so not really. I'm glad we're talking about it again, though, because there are a lot of words that get thrown around. And
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was coincidentally just talking with a friend about it this morning.
Oh, really?
Because we were talking about the intersectionality of race and gender in terms of the suffrage movement.
Oh, well, Carol, you are psychic, because that is exactly what we're talking about today. Intersections of gender and race. So what was your discussion this morning?
We were talking about the suffrage. She's in England. We were talking about the suffrage movement and how in the US, the Black men wanted to separate their suffrage movement from the women's suffrage. And then when women were fighting for their suffrage, there wasn't a lot of space for Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Native American women only got their suffrage way later. Anyway, so it was, part of the intersectionality between race and gender in terms of voting rights is one specific. And it was different in England. They had way fewer Black people, but the suffrage movement was not divided by race.
But is that what it is specifically, race and gender?
Great question. Not only race and gender.
Class, gender, class, anything that makes a difference and could make some sort of graph or grid.
You know what? That's so funny you say that. And I'm going to pop out my favorite new toy real quick and show you what I'm starting to sketch out on my page. If y'all want to be doodling along with me. Let me get the page set up here. Okay. Get this so it's
wow,
in the right direction. Oh, it's the future art classes. Now y'all can hopefully see that all right.
Ooh, it looks like two circles with a linking space.
Exactly. So what I wanted to start sketching out, and I really wanted to turn this conversation around to y'all today. Just really lightly, I kind of sketched out the word intersectionality. It's a big one, so I always want to start in pencil so that I don't get going and then the end of the word comes totally off the page. But I'm gonna zhuzh that up and make sure it's really fancy and attractive lettering at the top. But the idea of intersectionality, I think, really lends itself to a good old-fashioned Venn diagram. And I wanted to frame today's conversation specifically about race and gender. So I'm going to title my little Venn diagrams, race and gender here. So this is a real pain point that we're going to dive into a little bit more specifically today, discussing the plight of Black women. But as Carol mentioned, there are also issues we could put a whole Venn diagram circle here for class, And the key here is, just like we've been discovering with all the conversations we've had, is that this is an incredibly, like, racism is so complex. It's so interwoven into every aspect of society. And you can't only talk about, you can't talk about racism in a bubble or in a vacuum. It ties into where we live, how we live, our health, the type, like our income, pretty much everything. And one of the words that helps us get through this conversation is this term intersectionality, and just acknowledging that, just how sticky this situation is. But I wanted to kind of fill out with you guys, and I will start committing to my Venn diagram here, make it a little artsier later. What are some things that come to mind when you think about, like, obviously we talked so much about specifically racism, but obstacles that people face because of their race? And I'm going to start just writing in some notes. So we talked about health risks last week through environmental racism and where you live, health and housing. I'm just going to start filling these out. And I welcome you to do the same on your page. Ooh, circles and circling. Look at that.
I'm glad I used pencil. Intersectionality as a long word.
I know, I'm just erasing it and starting all over. That's so funny, Carol.
Well, I remember from years ago one of those signs that says plan ahead, and that, you know, last letters are crammed at the edge of the phone. That would be me.
Yeah,
That's so funny. I was just starting to erase at the same moment you said that.
And I also do like a little line to show where I want it to even fit. Lettering and text, I mean, that I should definitely do a whole class just about that, because there's a lot to it.
Did you fix your server?
Oh, yeah, it's, you know, it's just your email. What's doing
What?
that? Yeah.
I keep getting
The 9 weeks of Nicolaides.
emails from Antonelli School with old assignments from old classes.
Right. I'm gonna look back into it. I thought I had fixed it, but it obviously not. My email service just loves you, Judith. Just wants to stay in touch.
Well, actually, one of them was like, "Oh, I should practice that again."
Right. So while y'all are working on your Venn diagrams, I did want to pop up an article and share my screen real quick and just go over some issues that are really specific, that really specifically affect Black women. And we do have a lot of women on the call. And I'm really interested to hear your personal experiences also with sexism. I mean, I'm sure we've all faced it. Zach, maybe you've even had some sexism as a man. It'd be interesting to hear your take on that. But anything that we're trying to fill out, like things that come to mind when we think of race and specific racist actions that people have to deal with, systemic racism. There's also systemic sexism. And when you are in that little area of the Venn diagram where you're dealing with both race and gender issues, it's, as this article says, a devastating 1-2 punch. So let's look just real quickly. And if you want to fill out your little kind of infographic kind of thing we're making here with any of these tidbits, then that can help kind of liven up your page. And I wanted to, by the end of class, hopefully choose something a little bit more inspiring and draw a powerful, awesome Black woman that we can choose which one we want to draw to celebrate what potentially could be a lot more empowerment for Black women. So one of the most pernicious myths about Black people, and specifically Black women, is that that they are more resilient or inherently stronger than white women. And especially now that we're living through a pandemic and health is like a huge hot topic, that's something that is deadly. People are dying because doctors do not properly use the right amount of like anesthetic. Or, for example, I'll be sure to link this article to our class page, but often people come in and their pain is minimized. Like this woman tells a story of having a torn ACL. She was doing Tai Chi, and the doctor like gave her a slap on the knee and said, "You're fine, you know, take some ibuprofen." And studies are showing over and over again that this is some of that implicit bias, like really deeply baked in to just regular medical practice, starting at birth, that people are treating Black people differently in their treatment. So here we see Black infants are almost 4 times more likely than white infants to die from health complications caused by low birth weight. There is, I think it's like, I'll have to look for this exact figure, but I want to say Black women, here it is, are 3 times more likely than white women to die from preventable birth-related complications. And this is something that studies have shown is not affected by your class. So you can have an equally wealthy white woman and Black woman going into the hospital at the same time to, you know, have a baby, and they're going to get drastically different care. Statistically, just, you know, across the country. And it's really important that we remember that this is not because they are, you know, the opposite of the stereotype. It's not that there are these frail Black women that are giving birth and they're just dying at a higher rate. It is racism that is affecting Black women's health, not their rates. There's nothing about their bodies and about them giving birth that's making them die at this higher, you know, higher proportions.
I'm sorry to interrupt. What was the stat? Stat.
Here it is. Black women are 3 times more likely than white women to die from preventable birth-related complications.
Thank you very
Too
much.
long.
That's a lot. I was going to say twice as many, and I was thinking that was a lot. So that's something I'm going to stick in my little Venn diagram under race and gender. 3 times more likely to die at childbirth. And I think there's a lot that happens here. If you start reading some of the studies and some of the personal accounts of how this happens, generally when you're in the hospital and especially like giving birth, you have someone there to advocate for you. If it's, you know, the father of the child, if it's a, you know, mother or a grandmother, there's generally someone there who's there, you know, speaking for the person. And if you are in a primarily white environment and you're Black person trying to get the attention of like, hey, I think someone's wrong, there have been a lot of accounts that show that it's more difficult for people to even get the attention of the nurses. Whenever they say like, this doesn't seem okay, like what's happening, their opinions are discounted and people go to the white people. And I think a big part of that is how people tend to project themselves onto people that look like them. And so whenever you see some person who doesn't look like you, then you aren't as quick to jump and imagine yourself in their shoes. So there's this lack of empathy that begins to happen. So what I love this article because it also takes a historical view. And this doctor, who's a specialist in this kind of area, talks about how this stems from all the way back to the slave era, whenever there was this awful doctor, unfortunately, the father of gynecology, and I'm reading from the article here. Modern women's healthcare was developed without consent on the bodies of Black women. this doctor experimented on enslaved Black women without pain medication, which is one of the reasons that we have this idea that Black people feel less pain. There are even myths that Black people have thicker skin, which is just absolutely ridiculous and not true at all. Physical and mental health effects are unavoidable. Another really incredible study is showing that even if you don't die from bad healthcare, or if your needs aren't met whenever you go to the doctor in the same way that they would if you were white, what happens is there's toxic stress. And anyone who's had a racist experience, the more, whether or not it's interpersonal or institutional, over time, that type of stress promotes an inflammatory response in the body. And that is yet another reason why people of color have a higher level of things like hypertension, can lead to dementia, and Black women especially are at a higher risk of dying from these chronic conditions. So racism is deadly. Like, it kills you. Words do matter, and the stress response that we have whenever these things happen affect our bodies. And so premature death, you're seeing here, is more common in Black and Hispanic people than white people.
I don't know how to put these in what you're saying is important. I don't know how to put some of those thoughts into the diagram.
Illustrated. I don't feel like you have to necessarily put it all in there. For me, I'm just kind of putting some of the big ideas in little tiny little blips. So let's put in the center, between race and gender, maybe in class, I'm just putting racism is toxic.
That doesn't work.
Or racism, you could say, creates an inflammatory response.
Judith, what I started doing, because I write big anyway, I just put like a triangle in the intersection and then made it like a footnote at the bottom: 3 times more likely to die in childbirth.
And
that, I got that one in. I can't get anything else in. I mean, like,
well,
toxic,
then you make some sort of little shape and make a footnote to the other ones.
Got it. All right. I don't think I'm going to relate to this.
Yeah.
Not working for me, but go ahead. Keep talking. It's interesting.
Alrighty. I'll post this link because it has a lot of important information, and I think really illustrates just one aspect of the intersectionality between racism and sexism. And yeah, before we start illustrating perhaps a specific Black woman that we can find some inspiration from, maybe one of these quotes, I was thinking I'd love to hear, let me see you guys again. I'm curious if there are any specific stories of sexism that you might have experienced. If you're willing or care to share, it doesn't have to be like a huge, awful story or anything. Just to reflect on how, as women, we might have had, or man, might have had any experiences that we can think of that are specifically times that we felt like we weren't being heard or listened to, or if there's anything internalized. And I'll just share in my own experience. I wouldn't say I've experienced a whole lot of overt sexism where, except for maybe like as a waitress, serving people food that were, gross and flirty, but, they were going to tip really well if you put up with their kind of lecherousness. that's a thing. Like feeling sexualized whenever you're just trying to do your job, or having people like flirt with you whenever it's not really welcome, that kind of thing. But for me, what I found to be more challenging is an internalized sexism, where often I think I must have just gotten that idea not to speak up, to not voice my opinion or my feelings about a situation. You know, even though my parents had absolutely the best intentions, like we have a very Italian culture kind of in the family. So there's this very patriarchal, like the adult male is in charge and you should not challenge the authority in that system. And so often whenever I'm, you know, trying to run a business or start a new project or, you know, just do things in the world, and this isn't all the time, but I have noticed there are moments whenever I'll really feel myself holding back and not feel like maybe I'm good enough to be in a position of power or step into a position of leadership. And I have to catch myself and be like, where's that coming from? And why would I believe that? And really force myself sometimes into doing what feels uncomfortable, because that's not something I've seen represented in the world. Of course, it's happening more and more often, but it's interesting. Actually, me and Zach we've been diving into the Disney princesses and sexism in Disney princesses. And there's this graph that shows in all of the movies, even the more modern ones that have princess leading characters who are, you know, these kind of like trying to be feminist heroes, like in Frozen, it's not about getting the man, it's about sisterly love or whatever. But even in those films, they did a breakdown showing how many lines are spoken by women versus how many lines are spoken by men. And across the board in all the Disney princess movies, there are a vast majority of the lines are spoken by men.
Even in Frozen?
Even in Frozen.
Wow.
Bizarro, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's my own personal experience, and it's kind of just glossing over things. But is there anything that anyone has experienced or witnessed, perhaps, when it comes to sexism?
So I was lucky. I was the first person in my toy company that wasn't a secretary. You know, I've always felt I wasn't held back. But the one story, and I thought I shared this once in one of your classes, when I was at the toy company, I was the only female in the meetings with the heads of the departments, etc. And I was also young. I was just out of college, like 2 or 3 years out of college. And there was a head of the sales force who was an older man. I remember him as white hair. That's all I remember. I have no idea how old he really was. But every time he came into the meeting, he would come over and kind of like kiss me on the cheek like I was his little daughter, you know? Back then, you know, I didn't have any reaction to it at all. And when I've told the story before, people say, oh my God, that's horrible. It's true. But we didn't feel it. I mean, this was like 71. And we didn't, it wasn't meant that way. I mean, consciously, he didn't mean it that way. I didn't take it that way. But every time a question like this comes up, I immediately think of that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So it must have had an internal impact. I felt it was more, looking back on it, more kind of infantilism than sexism.
Certainly.
Oh,
Although,
yeah, the little cute little Judith. Yeah.
Right.
like
Mm-hmm.
patronizing, that kind of paternal.
Right.
You know,
But
I'm
he
gonna-
didn't mean it that way. And back then, I didn't consciously internalize it, but I clearly did.
Yeah, he didn't mean it to be offensive. However, he meant it to be a continuation of like the power systems that already exist and that were just like being like continued in that moment. And that's really difficult also to extricate yourself from. especially if it's a person in power, you know, a person that is your boss. And are you going to say, excuse me, no, I don't feel comfortable with that? That's going to piss off your boss, right? And that's just one of those moments, you know, for women in the workplace that they're taking advantage of their power.
Right. I wouldn't have back then thought to say, excuse me, I don't feel comfortable with it.
Sure.
But as I said, it comes up every single time when it's the only example I can think of.
Interesting.
That I
Wow.
ever experienced anything like that.
And I
Wow.
wonder how everybody else thought of that in the moment, or if they treated
They
you.
were all older men. They were all so they gave me the position of power. I was in the room, so to speak,
That's
taking off Hamilton. But I think they all, to some degree or another, were a little patronizing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting. Zach, yeah, please.
I can't say that I have been that any kind of sexism has like really negatively affected me in a workplace in like a very substantial way. But I do know that as a male, I am oftentimes not perceived as somebody who can empathize and try to how do I say, like that I'm not aware of how do I say of issues. And I try to take that in stride. My mother was a feminist and is still, but she was very active in the 70s. And so I grew up very, very, how do I say, very sensitive, very aware of how, you know, there is a what's it called, a really lopsided power structure where men are they're objectifying women and women are not equally represented. They're not being paid a commensurate amount, and like that's just and I get maybe it's a being in the minority, but I am, however, I don't know how best to say, but there are many instances where it's just assumed that that I don't know, and I know this is like a personal anecdote and maybe not
That's what we're here for.
yeah. And maybe not super representative of everybody, but I know for a fact that I get a little bit, how do I say, I get sad when the assumption is that you're a man and you don't know. That doesn't mean I have no idea what it means to be sexualized in the workplace. I have no idea what it means to be like the object of somebody's affection. In
Wow,
a
that's
way.
interesting. I was like,
Like,
what, really? Never? But yeah, I guess.
no, I mean, and the parallel I'm very, very readily able to draw is in the classical music world, it is very, very common, or has been very common since the beginning of time, for male professors at conservatories and universities to commit in predatory behavior with women students. And there have been, and I think, you know, it's been a unspoken demon of the world. I don't know how best you describe that. It's just common knowledge, I guess. But then as a result of the Me Too movement, some of the biggest names in classical music as performers and as educators were getting exposed and were getting fired, rightfully so. I've had women teachers, and I've never ever had that issue. I don't know of any male students who have had that issue, and they may have. But I, you know, I want to make sure that I'm clear, saying that I've never had that experience of being the object of a superior's affection, and my livelihood or my job has depended on it. Never has been the case. But I do feel like there is sometimes a wall or a barrier.
Right. So sexism in your case plays out in that you feel like you're perhaps excluded from certain conversations, or people assume that you might think a certain way about things because of your gender.
Exactly. And I don't want to be excluded from those conversations because I feel like I want to be a brother to my sisters. You know, I want to.
That's so beautiful, Zach.
Yeah, it really hurts me. One of my deepest, almost betrayals was when a mentor of mine, when I found out that a mentor of mine had been very inappropriate with one of my close friends, who was a woman, and like I that was probably one of the most. I haven't spoken to that mentor in almost a decade as a result. I haven't. I don't know. It was really, really tough, and I want to be a part of the conversation. I want to be a part of the change because it really is. It really hurts. It really, really hurts people, and I don't like it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, because I think what you just hit on is someone who was a role model for you and a teacher, someone who you were told and aspired to be more like, and who's someone who you ought to be able to just hopefully follow, showed such an inexcusable fault that it makes you question, what does it mean to follow that style of leadership? And this, again, I think representation just keeps coming up in art class after art class, because we're humans. We model ourselves on those who've come before us and the people that we admire. And if we have a power system and just a sense of normal or cultural normalcy that's like, oh, well, it's always been like that. Oh, well, this is...
Boys will be boys.
Boys will be boys.
And men will be men when they grow up.
Mm-hmm. And it must be so hard to have those two conflicting people in your brain. There's the teacher that you admired that taught you so much, but then there's also this predator. And how do you divorce the two and come up with a new model that you can follow? Right. So thank you for that perspective. I'm really glad you're here.
I'm so glad. I want to be a part of these conversations. Thank you.
Yay.
Just by sharing like that, you are a part of these.
Absolutely. And just that statement of wanting to be a brother. Predatory men don't look at women as to be protected and cared for the way your statement expressed, Zach. For me, my worst example of sexism goes back to being in college, and the football players had already been suspended, not expelled, but suspended for terrible behavior. But they weren't kicked out because they're the football players. And my friend and I, a young man friend and I, were walking. There'd been a school bus that took us out. This was at Stanford, California. So we were out to the Pacific Ocean on a bus from the school. And my friend Lars and I were walking along the shoreline, and there was a group of young men up on the cliff behind the beach, and they suddenly came running down at us and pulled our bathing suits away from our body and were dumping wet sand into our bathing suits.
Oh my God.
And behaving atrociously and scaring the big willies out of us. And fortunately, it didn't go any further than that. I think there were 6 or 7 of them, and just the 2 of us. And they were quite alarmed when I got onto the same bus to go back, because presumably they thought they were going to get away with this victimizing of. Anyway, I did go to the dean. So that was the first victimization, and the second was when I went to the dean of students and totally was dismissed, said maybe I was at the wrong school, and it was obvious that protecting the football players was much more important than the fact that I'd been attacked and that they had behaved so terribly, atrociously. That's more than harassment. That's
assault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my faith in male authority, which maybe was not huge at that point. I mean, no, there were older men and teachers I respected, but at that point, the institutional sexism was just so incredibly blatant. That was worse than being attacked.
Oh.
And it had repercussions in how comfortable I felt, putting myself forward or thinking I would be heard in any context. And then, the re-triggering that happens when that young man raped the woman he was the Stanford, swimming star. And, it just totally re-triggers the way the male establishment defended that rapist.
Yeah. It's so, I mean, what is so horrifying about that is that I can almost, because of the dominant, mindset, or the voice that's most clearly heard is the male defense, almost in advance. I can hear all these men saying, oh, nothing happened, it's fine. Again, the boys will be boys. We know what they would say to brush that aside. But what isn't centered is the female experience of what it feels like, what it means to be in that moment, because we don't have women who are truly in power, who are truly leading the conversation. Slowly it's improving, but in that moment, as an individual, you don't know that the people who are ripping your clothes off, that they're gonna stop, that they have a boundary. You don't know that they're gonna not rape you or beat you. They're already transgressing what is acceptable and what should be appropriate. So when are they going to stop? And that fear, that is what sets off these, again, we were talking about how racism creates inflammatory stress responses. It's the same thing for that type of assault. That is something that affected your health and your well-being, and would be re-triggered again, more stress response every time that sort of issue comes up. And I wanted to center our conversation first on feminism today, because I knew we were going to be primarily white women here. But because we've all had these very personal experiences and we can connect to what that means for us, can you imagine? I mean, we can't, but a whole nother layer where on top of this gender issue, there would be a whole nother layer of not being seen or acknowledged or trusted because you're also Black. And the weight of that falls so heavily on Black women. And
I was treated that way as obviously a college student, part of the dean. I'm talking now about not the young man, but the older man, the dean of students. Even though I was a white young woman at that point, student of his school, I was still totally dismissed. I can hardly imagine if I'd been Black.
Right. So, this is a topic I'm realizing as we're broaching it today, there's just so much more here, and there's so many more applications or stories of the issues that Black women face. But one thing that I do want to point out is that Black women, even though they are, and perhaps because they are some of the people who see the most discrimination and are kind of bearing the brunt of both racism and sexism, they also tend to be the leaders of movements. And they are some of the most active and the people who create incredible change. So I'm gonna have to find some people that we can spotlight and hopefully do some more work around and dive much deeper into this issue. But just to get started, one thing I want to make sure to say is that the feminist movement has gotten a lot of flack because of not really looking at or acknowledging Black women in the feminist movement. And many Black feminists, or just Black women in general, are they don't want to be involved in the feminist movement because it's so focused on white women issues only that they're not seeing this as a much broader conversation. So I just wanted to point that out, although I think we should dive into it more deeply. And I see we lost Zach, so.
He did message himself out.
Yes,
Yeah.
very sweet.
I'm so glad he's part of our
am.
discussions.
Say again?
I'm so glad. Just the same thing you said in your note, Judith. I'm so glad he's part of our group and our discussions.
Me too. I miss Patty. She's important.
Me too. Yeah, Pat.
Different
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
So I'm hung up, of course, being the person I am. I'm hung up on this Venn diagram and not being able to fill it in. And I would like to go back to it for a couple of minutes.
Absolutely. I just pulled up mine. I wrote underneath intersectionality, I did write a little definition. Overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantage in areas of race, class, gender, etc. I'll type that into the comments.
Thanks. But I need to fill this in more in other ways.
Mm-hmm. So let's fill it up in together. I think that would be really overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantage in areas of race, class, gender, etc. Intersectionality. See. And I'm also going to share my screen real quick for some more ideas. All right.
Look at those.
Yeah, so they've done the work for us. That's feminine and masculine. We're looking for race specifically. Black.
It's not, it wasn't filling in the center as much as filling in the circles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think we'll do better off doing our own page here. Okay, so let's think about, I'm just going to start off on section by section, gender. So not having a seat at the table.
Oh, well, that's sexism. So I will.
Yeah, I'm putting that in my gender section. So that's going to include representation in government.
So it's lack of representation. Right. I got it. All right.
Not having representation in government. Also, something I was, so I'll say lack of representation in film. And what I'm going to write there, Bechdel test.
What test?
The Bechdel test. If you haven't heard of this before, it's a really incredibly simple, like horrifyingly simple. Let me make sure I'm spelling it right. Bechdel test. It is Bechdel, the Bechdel test. And
again, please, Jessica, Bechdel. Okay.
And this is a measure of the representation of women in fiction. And it's applied mostly to movies, but you can really apply it to a book or anything. So these are the requirements. First, it has to have two women, two named women. So imagine two people, two women in a movie have to have a name. They have to talk to each other. That's rule number 2. Do these two women talk to each other? And then question number 3, do they talk to each other about something other than a man? Those are the 3 requirements of the Bechdel test. And what is so amazing is,
a great photo.
oops, well, thank you. I'm trying to, there we go. What's amazing is that of Oscar winning films, of just films that are out there, it's something like up to a certain point, it was 60% of films did not pass this test. And it's really disturbing, and it goes back to who's writing the scripts, who's producing the films. Like, because we don't have women at the table making decisions, deciding, you know, what movies will be made, we keep going back to the cultural norm, to the way things have always been done, which is sexist and racist, and, you know, many of these other problematic things that we're hopefully untangling ourselves from. So I said lack of representation in film, Bechdel test. I spelled it wrong. So in movies, do we have enough representations of women so that young women, kids especially, can see films of, you know, the woman being the hero and achieving her dreams, and that dream not just being marrying Prince Charming, but having a full life that is outside of the, you know, be a mother and
Missing role models.
yeah, missing role models. That's a great way to put it. And also that would go into race, would be a similar kind of missing role models in popular culture, missing positive role models in popular culture. And that's something I've been thinking about recently, is like, what does it mean, or how does it look to be the sidekick? Because in film, you know, you so often have like the Black best friend, or the, you know, sidekick to the white person. Even a movie like The Help has received a lot of criticism, because it is this white saviorism story of this white woman who comes in and saves all these Black people, and she's the center of the story. She's the main character, as opposed to it being a story of empowerment from the Black person's perspective. And so if we see these films, like, often in my brain, you know, I'll kind of be imagining like, well, how do I want to live in the world, play out in the world? And it's easy, like, and then I started anti-racist art classes, and I'm such a hero because I did this. And it's like, whoa, step back. The point is not for yet another kind of reiteration of the same story of like white person as the main character. Like, how can I be the sidekick? How can I be the best supporting actor in the movie instead of the leading character?
Interesting.
That's a great way to put it.
What would you put in the circle for class?
Environmental racism. Well, that would be in the under in class. I'm going to put environmental racism and redlining. And I'm also going to put school to prison in the intersection between race and class. So in class, so let's just think about it. What are some of the disadvantages?
You just listed environmental racism, redlining, etc. under class.
I'm sorry. Let me show you.
That under race?
I put those in between race and class, in the little section in between.
Oh, I'm stuck. All right, never mind. I'll throw this out. It's okay.
Pencil is probably a good idea, and I've got such bad handwriting, I'll have to redo this. I'm scratching stuff out. But it's a mental exercise.
Yes, it is.
So for class, though, I mean, what do we know to be some of the big issues of being poor? I'm going to say healthcare. A lot of poor people don't have access to healthcare. Respect and dignity. What should I say? It's not that they have respect and dignity, or
lack of.
That there's this disdain that people have for people who are in poverty, as if it's their choice, or like they decided, and it wasn't the neighborhood they were born into or the situation they were born into. And as much as like the American meritocracy is like theoretically a great thing, does it really exist and is it really accessible? I'm going to say in class, no, not or unequal access to education.
Limited opportunities for education, work.
Mm-hmm. We have limited opportunities in work as well. Feeling hopeless.
And helpless.
Helpless. Unvalued or undervalued. Like that we're not like a society that really truly seems to inherently value like humans just for existing and being human. It's like, okay, well, you have to be a human, but you also have to look this way and have this much stuff. And
right.
Oh, my handwriting is so messy. So class and gender, what does it mean to be poor and a poor woman? It's easier to be, you're at risk, I'll say at risk of being taken advantage of.
Yeah, and I mean, the story of domestic workers.
Yes.
Being not only financially abused, but sexually abused by the master of the house and the master of the house's sons. And
mm-hmm.
So there's that risk of abuse. There's so many of them.
I'm just thinking of
abuse, yeah.
Like migratory workers, people who may not be legal, they might be in a class where they're not recognized for the work that they do for our society, and they're taken advantage of in a huge way. And
how about sorry.
Please go ahead.
I was just saying, how about just putting down ICE?
Yes.
I mean, really,
and it's so horrifying, but we live in a day and age where your children could be taken from you and put in a cage because of your gender and your class.
Mm-hmm.
Men don't tend to travel with their children quite as often. But yeah, ICE is a good way to sum that up.
Summarize it, yeah.
Women's rights.
What did you just write?
I was just about to write underpaid in the gender section. Women are statistically paid less than men. Okay, I could put the same thing actually in the center between race and gender, because that's definitely an issue. Your salary, so there's financial and gender consequences to being born Black or a woman. I'm saying Black and speaking specifically Black, but I'm glad you mentioned ICE, because of course for people from any people of color from other heritages, of course here in Texas we think most often about Mexican Americans or people with Mexican heritage.
What else would you put in race that's not true of gender and class specifically?
Goodness gracious.
Problem is they're also overlapping.
Isn't it? And I think that's why this is such an interesting subject. But let's say police brutality, perhaps.
Oh, good.
Um,
Well, not respected or valued certainly goes there too.
Could be in the respect, in the very center of them all. Respect and value. I was thinking we had that class about hair. So it could just be like, how would you say, style, culture, beauty,
Well, it's
and beauty under attack. That there's legislation in certain areas that says you can't wear your hair the way you want to wear your hair.
right.
Colorism could go under race.
What does that mean?
Colorism is how speaking to how the shade of your skin, even within like a darker race or community, there's racism against the darker colors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, boy,
That
Kendi really brings that out in Stamped from, I mean, he has a short section on it in How to Be an Anti-Racist, but there's a lot about it in Stamped from the Beginning about the colorism of different lighter black people against their darker ones.
Under gender, I still have a little bit more space, so I'm going to say no power or limited power maybe over your own body.
The fact that men think that they should be legislating about women's bodies in this day and age is beyond appalling to me.
I know. That's
I mean,
great.
for us, Jessica, for Judith and me to, be seeing this happening again now after, somebody in San Miguel had the T-shirt, I thought we won this one already.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I've got this one last little spot. What should I put?
Mine's all dangling all out all over my page because I write so big, but the diagram is, oh boy.
Oh my God, it's almost 12:10.
It is, yes. We've been lingering, so
That's good. I don't mind lingering, but I just didn't realize it.
Yeah, this is one where we kind of turned the tables and tried to go in a little bit more about our own experiences and things, kind of summing up a lot of what we've learned into these Venn diagrams here. Mine's a mess. It's not exactly artwork at all today, but I thought it was a good visual representation of a lot of the issues that we've been talking about. And I really hope that those Venn diagrams can help you remember that term, intersectionality.
For sure.
And just that.
Mine was very compact. I have a white space where I put white out over something and I have to fill it in.
There you go. Oh wait, let's see. Let me pop you up here. Ooh, yeah. I like the colors. That looks great. You have such good handwriting.
Wow. I don't know, but thanks.
Excuse me. Yeah, mine, it just looks like a page of writing with some circles in them, so I don't think I need to hold them up. But I did a lot of writing.
Great. I mean,
I just have to mention an incredibly heartwarming human being and movie. I don't know, we saw the movie through our library loan system, so I don't know where else it's available. It's called A Man Named Pearl.
Pearl?
Pearl, like the pearl that grows in an oyster.
Mm-hmm.
And people in the neighborhood were concerned about him moving in because they were concerned that Black people don't keep their yards up. This man turned his yard into a work of art of topiary. And he brought his little tiny town in South Carolina onto the map because they started putting topiary in their main street so people wouldn't just be rushing through the town on the way to somewhere else. And he taught his neighbors how to do topiary. And
Wow.
he's taught in colleges, and he has people coming in tour buses. It's just such an incredible story of this sharecropper son who had a vision, and as an artist, his imagination, his ability to think in
Yeah.
3 dimensions and then shape a living, growing organism like a tree or shrub.
Wow.
And he also was, some of his first plants were rejects from the city nursery that he rehabilitated, and people were saying, yeah, it's such a heartwarming story of this man's vision as an artist being realized and appreciated, and what he did for his whole community, Black and white people. So in a time when you can get concerned about how things are going, it's really lovely to have a story like that. We just watched it last night.
Is it a modern day story, or is this from?
He's still alive. Let me just say, I'm just going to do a quick. If you've got 1 more minute, I'll just ask Google.
That's exactly what we need. Oh,
Pearl Fryer, topiary artist.
excellent.
Pearl Fryer is an American topiary artist living in Bishopville, South Carolina.
He's 80 now. He's still alive.
Good for him, and good for that story, and I'm going to look for it.
Yeah, he would work, he was working at one point 12 hours a day at his full-time job, and then he'd be out at night with Klieg lights on, pruning his trees. And if you can't find the movie, I think there are now all sorts of entries about him. It's spelled Fryer, spelled with a Y, F-R-Y-A-R.
F-R-Y-A-R.
Yeah, I mean, he does, I mean, one of his most beautiful ones, I don't know if I can,
Oh,
they're
definitely Google.
absolutely stunning.
Oh my God,
Look
that's
at
amazing.
Jessica. Oops, did Jessica freeze? Whoops. I mean, it's so incredibly original. I mean,
that's gorgeous.
most topiary people do bunnies and, maybe some spirals, but he's just